If they only knew me. The following slideshow presentation was written by a teacher in response to the well-known children's book, If She Only Knew Me, by Jeff Gray and Heather Thomas, published in 2005 by Rocket Publishing. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I spend several hours each evening preparing lessons so that they can learn what they need to learn, perhaps they wouldn't take tests without even trying, without studying, and without putting any effort into passing. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I have spent hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars a year on supplies for school, including pens, pencils, paper, glue, tape, markers, and a large variety of other necessary supplies that I gladly share with my students, perhaps they wouldn't tell me that they don't have enough money to buy a pencil so they can do their work. If they only knew me. If they only knew that when I get home I've got to care for my sick mother, who has been near death and in and out of hospitals for the past year, perhaps they wouldn't yell and scream at me whenever I ask them to sit down and get started on their classroom assignment for the day. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I don't get to go out with friends very often because I sit at home most evenings grading homework and preparing for the next day's classwork assignments, perhaps they wouldn't forget or neglect to do their homework assignments every night. If they only knew me. If they only knew that when I'm visiting relatives for a weekend, I always seem to have to cut my weekend short so I can get home and spend several more hours on Sunday afternoon and evening preparing for the next week, perhaps they wouldn't tell me that they don't care if they fail because they'll just end up going to summer school anyway. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I am often exhausted and sometimes even physically ill due to the stress caused by my job, perhaps they wouldn't curse me every time I ask them to start their work. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I just spent the previous period in another classroom getting yelled at and cursed at by my unruly and disrespectful students from another class, perhaps they wouldn't disrupt their class and prevent their classmates from getting a proper education. If they only knew me. If they only knew that my car broke down on the way to work this morning and I had to call a mechanic to come and tow the car, and then take a cab to work, and still make it to work on time, so I would be there for them, perhaps they wouldn't tell me that they couldn't get to school on time this morning because they missed their bus. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I just got hit with several large, unexpected bills due to much needed home repairs that have just recently become necessary. Perhaps they wouldn't tell me that they can't afford to buy the school uniform. If they only knew me. If they only knew that my kids at home have all gotten sick and I need to take them all to the doctor right after work today. Perhaps they wouldn't scream at me, telling me that I have to stay late at work today so that they can copy their homework assignment that they didn't copy earlier, or get their coat from my classroom because they were running around in the hallway during dismissal and forgot to pick it up before I left the building. If they only knew me. If they only knew that it's parent-teachers conference night at my children's school, and I too need to go up to a school and see some teachers. Perhaps they wouldn't tell me that they just don't care. If they only knew me. If they only knew that a student in my last class brought in a weapon and threatened me and the other students, so I had to get involved and somehow figure a way to protect myself and protect the rest of the students in that class. Perhaps they wouldn't start fights with students in this class. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I have already asked the last question 6 times and restated the directions to the assignment 8 times, perhaps they wouldn't ask me again to repeat what I just said. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I spent several hours on the phone last night explaining to students' parents why their sons and daughters might not be passing my class, instead of enjoying my evening watching my favorite television shows or spending time with my family. Perhaps they wouldn't tell me that I don't care. If they only knew me. If they only knew that yesterday I spent an hour after school cleaning the gum off of the desks, sweeping up the crumbs, and picking up candy wrappers off the floor of my classroom, perhaps they wouldn't eat, drink, or chew gum in my class, especially after being told so many times already that it is not permitted. If they only knew me. If they only knew that one of my kids has a dance recital tonight, another has a martial arts class, and yet another has band practice, and I have to figure out a way to bring all 3 to their respective obligations and then go back several hours later to pick them all up. Perhaps they wouldn't tell me that they didn't have enough time last night to do their homework. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I spend hours trying to figure new ways to teach a lesson that I've been teaching for years in order to make it more interesting and exciting for them, even though I don't have a Hollywood movie budget. Perhaps they wouldn't tell me they're bored. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I spent hours yesterday afternoon grading the last exam that they took and discovering that most of the scores were far below passing. Perhaps they wouldn't tell me that they don't have to do the assignment because they already know it. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I spent tens of thousands of dollars over the years for college and graduate school just to be qualified to get my teaching license in order to be able to teach them the material that they need to know, perhaps they wouldn't keep asking me to give them pens, pencils, and paper that I bought and paid for with my own money. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I spent the last 3 days in bed on my back because of the flu that I caught from one of the many students who come to school sneezing, coughing, and with runny noses, perhaps they wouldn't come to school sick. If they only knew me. If they only knew that I too have a life after school, a family outside of my job, hobbies I enjoy doing when I'm not working, places I like to go other than this school building, and things I like to do that are not related to my job, perhaps they wouldn't spend their lives trying to make mine so miserable. If they only knew me.